2, 1. Good evening, folks. I'm your moderator, Bob Hiss. It's Thursday, June 9 at 7:35. Having been informed by the clerk that we've achieved quorum, I'll call our annual town meeting for 2022 back to order. What I'd like to do first is by prior agreement, just get some logistics out of the way. First, you remember on Tuesday night, we voted to put Articles 13 and 14 up to the top of the agenda for tonight. So we normally start with that. By prior agreement, a member has been asked to be recognized to make a motion to reopen an article. So I'll recognize that member. Then we'll go to 13 and 14. I think I'll remind you again, what I would like to do is entertain a motion then to for the town meeting to appoint Brian Walsh as temporary moderator for the discussion of 13 and 14. Because I imagine I'm going to get questions about electronic voting, so I'll disappear off the podium and then go to a different room and be able to deliver the presentation and handle any questions that you might have that the moderator sends my way. At the conclusion of 14, there's another member that is asked that in case we float a Monday, they have a conflict, and can we move an article up to tonight? I'll entertain that. So with all that, if Ms. Agostino is on the line. Ms. Agostino, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Diane DeTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. I rise, first of all, to make the point of order, which might help expedite the follow-up motion, because the point of order, takes precedence over motions. The point of order is, as we read Article 17 that was passed Tuesday evening, we read that it was submitted by the Select Board and the Planning Board. Article 17 notes the Master Plan Implementation Committee, which we'll abbreviate as the MPIC, per the chair advised me that was the brief way to address it, was governed under the Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 81D, that was noted during Tuesday evening's discussion. And those responsible to under this Mass General Law to govern the MPIC are, in fact, the Select Board and the Planning Board. Unfortunately, the Planning Board has never been involved in Article 17, whether it was just, a mistake with changing of people or whatever. But the point of order that I raise is we can't pass an article that is submitted by governing boards under the Mass General Law that gave them the powers to oversee the MPIC when 50% of the parties never posted meetings, never had any discussions. I've also, throughout the day, waited to receive the documents to show when the Select Board might have posted this article in their discussions for their agenda or their meetings. So that's the point of order that I want to get across. I'm not rising to cause havoc here, because it may seem, well, wait a minute, Diane, we've already passed the article Tuesday evening. But if we're going to pass an article, it has to meet the laws that govern it. And this clearly doesn't. It also would then raise the question of the open meeting law. So my motion would be to reopen Article 17, which is on page 28, and I believe you have before you, for purposes of briefly discussing what can be done in order to move forward with, in keeping with all the laws that we swore to uphold at the start of our Springtown meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
All right, if I could see in the chat, is there a second on the motion to reopen for consideration Article 17? There's a second from Virginia King. Thank you. I've been informed by Town Council that we completed Article 17 in an elapsed time through to now in less than an hour. So when we go to a vote, this will only require a majority vote to reopen. By the way, someone raised this point last night. If it's greater than an hour is when it requires a 2/3 vote. So this would just require a majority vote. On the reconsideration, this is Let me check something here. Majority to consider and interrupt. Okay, yeah, so this requires debate. So at this point, I think what I'd like to do is first recognize the chair of the Warrant Committee, Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes?
I have not made the motion yet.
I thought you just made a motion to reopen.
No, I wanted to raise the point of order first. And you just raised the point about town council and the 1 hour. There's a follow-up point of order. Should we not, so the point of order deals with we have to abide by the given laws that govern this. Should we not reopen, review, and discuss how we could potentially address those missteps? Can we please hear from town council as to if the motion didn't carry to reopen, then what would happen with this article? Is this one of the articles that the town clerk has to submit to the municipal law unit of the Attorney General's office? And then I would make my motion based on the second.
Ma'am, I think it's simpler because right now we're having a discussion absent any article here. You raise a point of order as a process question with the way the moderator's conducting the meeting. I think what I would entertain is if you made a motion to reconsider, then we can hear from the impact, and it would be seconded, I think. We could hear the impact, what the select board do, what's the planning board think, what are the town council implications, and we can then the members will know and be informed about their decision to reconsider.
All right, so the way I presented it, you did put it out to have a second, so we'll just go with that as already having made the motion. However, point of orders do always supersede any debate and any motion. So I'll hold that second point of order to be sure that we find out what the follow-up process is, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a note for the members here. With the Zoom technology and the ease of creating chats, we are being inundated with members pinging points of order. So many that it's going to stop discussion. So for example, in some cases, I've seen 6 points of order. And so when I look at them and I see one of them that needs addressing, I speak to that one without going through every single person that's raising a point of order. And I believe that is just a policy I'm implementing under this Zoom world we're in. Because I think you would all recognize when we've been in the high school auditorium, points of order are much less frequent than we're seeing here. But with that, so that's why I'm trying to manage these points of order with some care, I should say. So at this point, since we're now under discussion to reopen Article 17, I'd like to just hear from the Select Board. Select Board, could you describe, Mr. Doyle, could you describe the process that Article 17 followed from your understanding?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The understanding is that the Master Plan Implementation Committee approved the recommendation of increasing the members of that committee from 5 to 7. It then came before the Select Board, and the Select Board supported the recommendation and voted to increase the number of members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee from 5 to 7 members.
Thank you. I'd also like to hear from the chair of the Planning Board on what the Planning Board thought or thinks of Article 17. Is Ms. Hall, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. I would like to recognize Tim Zwinski to discuss the process on behalf of the Planning Department. Our
town planner. Right, Mr.
Yes.
Zwinski, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the member who made the motion is correct in that through a number of miscommunications and oversights that the Planning Board, while it had discussed the article, never actually formally took a vote on it in the period of time when the warrant was being assembled. So the board is prepared to discuss it right now. If you'll afford them a few minutes to provide an opinion and a recommendation on the article. But I think the other note about the governing law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 41, Section 81D, my opinion, based on my read of that statute, is that it actually has no role in governing the composition or the creation or the nomination of members of a master plan implementation committee. It only deals with the drafting and the creation of master plans themselves. How they get implemented, whether it's through a committee or through some other department or board, is an entirely a creation of an individual town's town meeting or government structure. So I think the issue of the planning board vote is a relevant one, and I think the board is prepared to rectify that right now. If you'll just afford us a few minutes to kind of huddle up and have a little bit of a discussion and come back with a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Zawinski. While we're doing that, I think had also discussed with town council the members' concerns about the governance of the master plan implementation committee by Mass General Law. Mr. Freitag, are you with us here? And could you comment on your opinion? Because Mr. Zawinski is not an attorney, but you are our town's attorney.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Freitag from the Office of Town Council. I agree with the opinion just expressed by Mr. Zawinski. Chapter 4181D does govern and speak to the creation of a plan, but the creation of a committee, a master plan implementation committee, is in this town is entirely a creation of and a result of a vote of town meeting. It is not. It is not governed by mass law. It is governed by the town meeting vote in 2014 that created the Master Plan Implementation Committee, which is subject to, from time to time, revision or alteration by town meeting as town meeting sees fit.
Okay, very good. Could you also speak to, I think the member asked a question of the appropriateness of an article if it was voted on by the select board, not voted on by the planning board, but presented in the article as submitted by the select board and the planning board. I think that was the member's question.
I believe that notwithstanding those, that error, that the planning board did not vote on this particular article before it was submitted to the warrant, it was still taken up by the select board. And it seems to me that notwithstanding that mistake, the planning board is in a position tonight to weigh in on the plan and vote, and then relay that vote to town meeting. And then town meeting is then entitled to take a vote on the article before it.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone wish to speak to this motion to reconsider Article 17? I see Ms. Agostino's hands are up, but no other hands. So with that, ma'am, I'll recognize you while we wait for the planning board. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Diane DiTullio, Agostino, Precinct 9. I misspoke when I was reading which of the governing parties or articles and laws govern this situation. And in fact, sorry, I should have raised my hand, but I did send you a note through the question and answers. In the 2014 town meeting article 13, the governance of the MPIC is in the hands of both the select board and the planning board, which is why we see Article 17 submitted by the select board and the planning board. However, under the open meeting laws, in all the minutes reviewed, and while I understand the town planner says that they discussed it at some point, the only documentation that is posted in the minutes approved regarding any discussion or any votes taken. So it's not just a matter of they discussed it and didn't take votes. It couldn't be located in any minutes as having even been discussed. They did locate, fortunately, they reached a former town employee to locate what the select board member referenced, that an article was sent to the select board and it was to increase, it was submitted by the MPIC, but to approve the increase in the number of members. An article submitted by a board or committee that doesn't govern it should not have been accepted by the selectmen. It should have been referred to the planning board to properly post a meeting for the residents of the town to know that they were going to discuss increasing it. So it's not just a matter of, oh, we can discuss it tonight, we can vote tonight. There are no agendas with the posting. There's no meetings with the posting. So the planning board would potentially be in violation. So I strongly noted that the select board said that after they received it, they approved it. They approved the article submitted by this MPIC to increase their size. I know in Tuesday night's discussion, it came up that, as the moderator, have increased the size of some committees. The Commission on Disability, as an example, had submitted to the selectmen that we wanted to increase the size of the commission. And I can't thank people enough for volunteering so that we now have a full commission. And everyone, hopefully you realize you can use closed captioning to capture every word that's spoken tonight. But the Commission on Disability was able to do that without even going to town meeting because the governing Mass General Law allowed the select board to go to a maximum of 9. So as I pointed out in the beginning, we all take an oath of office to uphold both Mass General laws as well as our own articles. So we get back to my question on the point of order that if we pass this article that has not met the open meeting law, is this one of the articles that the town clerk must submit to the Attorney General's municipal law unit to be approved? Because there is a form that generally is submitted along with her request. And the question asked, does it meet all of the Mass General laws and governing of the city or town? So that's where that question came in.
Understood. So you have a question for the town clerk then?
Correct.
Okay, Madam Clerk, can you come answer the member's question?
Good evening. It does not get submitted to the Attorney General's office.
Could you explain just why?
Well, as town council had stated, that this is a bylaw of the town, does not need to go before the Attorney General's office.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ma'am, you're still unmuted. Did you have a follow-up?
Yes. So in response to that answer, I thank the town clerk for clarifying that this, by approval, we are making this a bylaw of the town, which makes it even more important that we follow posting requirements, minute requirements, and that we not just say tonight, oh, it's really easy. Let's just let the planning board take their vote and move on. That would be the easy thing to do. But we are including it has, and the language is not of the article, even has amended, would not be something that the town council should be approving because it does not identify the Article 13 of the 2014 town meeting. So it would require, it needs to be referred back to actually be properly written and recognize the governing authorities as well as supporting the open meeting law.
Okay,
thank you.
The town council, Kevin Freitag, has his hand raised. Mr. Freitag, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Moderator, I just spoke with the town clerk and we had discussed this, and I just wanted to clarify the point that this is not a bylaw. This is a committee that is being formed as a result of the vote of town meeting. Therefore, the submission process to the AG's office, which is appropriate for the creation or amendment of town bylaws, is not applicable. Second, with regard to the open meeting law issue, any issue that may exist, it is my opinion, is now being resolved by the planning board taking a vote on whether or not it supports this article, which they're going to report to town meeting, in my understanding, momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Agostino, if I let you speak again, I'm violating process, and you know how important process is to you. So I do have two other members wishing to speak. can I go to them and come back to you for your third follow-up?
It's actually not a third follow-up when it's a point of order. So I'll let them speak to hopefully expedite things, but it is a point of order to what was just stated by town council. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Ms. Regina Campbell Malone. Man, I think welcome to town meeting, and you're recognized.
Thank you so much. I appreciate process like anyone. I'm just wondering if there's an easier, simpler way to perhaps resolve this by making a motion to have a friendly amendment remove the planning board from the submission line.
I'm not sure we can remove the submitting authority from a printed article. It's an interesting question. Because once the article is printed, the article is somewhat sacrosanct. We can, have amendments to its content, and I think town council did confirm that this this appointing authority was the select board and the planning board per a 2014 article. So I think it would be probably inappropriate to try to erase them, so to speak, from the submitting bodies for this Article 17 this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Hall, are you prepared to reply back?
Actually, no. Sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for Mr. Moderator. We were waiting and we were listening to the discussion. It was important that we heard all points being made. So we have not begun to deliberate, but we can do so quickly if we can, if conversation is completed. We just wanted to hear the full conversation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Freitag, while they're doing that, could you just remind the audience who are the governing, let's say the appointing authorities of the Master Plan Implementation Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council. Regarding the appointment of members, it is a joint appointment by the Select Board and by the Planning Board. Regarding the submission question that is now being addressed, notwithstanding the Planning Board's current discussion, it seems to me that even if it was simply the Planning Board, the Select Board, which had submitted this article on its own, it would still be appropriate for it to be considered by town meeting this evening. I just wanted to point that out because I think that's important to realize that the Select Board controls the warrant. They put the articles on the warrant with the exception of citizens petitions. And so therefore it's properly being considered by town meeting, even if there was an issue regarding the process the planning board undertook regarding this particular article. Thank you.
So if I can have a follow-up so I can make sure I'm clear on your answer and so the members can. So even though the article in 2014 that created in town meeting the MPIC, which was, and then created the authority for the select board and the planning board to appoint members, you're saying expanding that could be an article supported and recommended just by the select board?
Correct, because ultimately town meeting has the authority. If there had been a citizens petition submitted to town meeting this evening to increase the membership from 5 to 7, and it hadn't been submitted by the planning board or the select board, I think that would be appropriately considered by town meeting because ultimately town meeting is the one that makes the decision. The question of who's asking the question to town meeting can be answered a number of different ways. Ultimately, the authority rests with town meeting regarding what is to happen, whether the MPIC was to be created in the first instance and whether its membership should be expanded from 5 to 7. That authority rests solely with town meeting.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Why don't we pause a minute? Because I see no other hands raised. I think the last item we're waiting for is the opinion of the planning board on this Article 17. With no other hands, I do see Ms. Agostino. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, Diane DiTullio, Agostino, Precinct 9. As I stated, There are several points of order. I stepped aside to allow discussion to continue, but point of orders do take precedence over motion. They're not simply a matter of discussion. The initial speaker to this motion was the chair of the select board, who stated that they received, and this relates to what town council was just stating, has a point of order, that they received from the MPIC a submission for an article, and that it went to the select board and they approved it. So the select board did not post in their agenda, nor did they have any minutes where it was discussed for residents under the open meeting law to know that they, the select board, were having the discussion in addition to the planning board. And I will read you what was submitted because the town planner fortunately was able to obtain it. And this is why immediately upon reading the initial language in this article, it jumped out as being not substantive to meet your basic point of order of having an article that is clear and concise for the town. So the article read, the submission, Article XX authorizes a 7-member master plan implementation committee. And I will add that the office of the select board could not submit or provide either this, which was submitted and which was voted on, or Article 17 has written in the warrant. To see if the town will vote to authorize the select board and the planning board to appoint no more than 2 additional master plan implementation committee members for the purpose of reviewing the implementation plan within the town's master plan, established under Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 81D, to change from a member committee to a 7-member committee, and to recommend to the planning board and the select board the actions necessary to implement the master plan approved with amendments and accepted by the planning board June 25th, 2015, including timing, resources, and responsibilities. Said committee was expected to report to the planning board and the select board annually. Said committee shall consist of 7 members to be appointed jointly by the planning board and the select board for terms that are renewed annually. 1 member shall be a member of the planning board or its designee, and a 2nd member shall be a member of the board of selectmen or its designee. The other members shall have expertise in planning, architecture, economic development, landscape architecture, real estate, or other relevant fields, and to act on anything thereto submitted by the master plan implementation committee. So the point in raising this point of order again, which was also raised the other night, this is what was submitted to the select board. It has not been located that this language was reviewed, discussed, posted, approved in any final format. And you will note, I'm sure the town council picked up, that they did not reference the 2014 Article 13, under which this amendment would want to be made. That they are once again referring back to the same way I did in the beginning, mistakenly referring to the Mass General Law, which really just governs the whole master plan. So the points of order are factual. No one could provide the article has submitted. The only minutes that were provided from the select board showed that the title of the article to increase the MPIC were put onto the warrant. It did not say that the select board submitted the article. So you know, when you're talking about, and well, it might be easy to say, well, let's, make an amendment and remove one of the committees. The authority, as it was just read here, lies from the 2014 article. It lies in the hands of both the select board and the planning board. And as we discussed the other night, the question was raised, well, who's going to make the appointments and what kind of appointments might be made?
Ma'am?
This submission that was voted on has an article from them, was not in good order because it was not written by the governing authority. And that's the point of order. That's not a discussion to the motion.
All right, ma'am. I'm going to tell you what a point of order is as the town moderator. I'm reading from page 109 of town meeting time. One, is the speaker entitled to the floor? You haven't raised that point. Second, is what the speaker is saying or proposing indecorous, frivolous, irrelevant, illegal, or contrary to proper procedure? You haven't raised that point. Is any pending action frivolous, irrelevant, illegal, or contrary to proper procedure? The action we're pending now is opening an article, reopening an article. All the points you are making are arguments in favor of that. They are not process points of order. And I've let you make these points at considerable length. So at this point, I'm going to acknowledge two other points of order. Mr. Fundling raised the points I just raised, and Mr. Hart asked, how is the speaker able to speak so long when these aren't process points? So, ma'am, at this point, the next thing I want to hear from is the planning board. So if we could just pause for a minute, I'm going to go check and see what's up with the planning board. I just checked with the planning board. They're almost done. Meanwhile, another hand is raised. Mr. McLean, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was hoping the town council could weigh in on whether or not it's relevant that any of the items of concern that have been raised about the validity of open meeting law procedures being followed or votes being taken prior to town meetings vote the other night are actually relevant. It seems to me that the warrant committee voted, town meeting voted after the article was recognized, and the fact that open meeting laws or anything else were not followed in a prior procedure should not undo anything that town meeting did. So, question to the town council, is there a problem with the validity of the vote that town meeting took the other night?
Thank you. Mr. Freitag, you're recognized to answer the member's question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I don't believe that the issue of whether or not there was an open meeting law is relevant to the issue of whether or not the town meeting vote from Tuesday night is valid. I think that they're separate. I think that the issue is perhaps relevant to the motion to reconsider that has been proposed, but ultimately I don't think that the concern about an open meeting law violation is relevant to whether or not the town meeting vote itself is in fact valid. Thank you.
So if the town thinks it's the open meeting law is a concern, it can reopen the article and vote the article down.
I think that the town certainly can consider that, and a person can make a motion asking to reconsider on those grounds, and then it's up to the town meeting to decide.
Okay, thank you. I see Ms. Hall of the planning board. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Meredith Hall, Chairman of the Planning Board. The board has discussed this, and we have voted to approve the submission of Article 17 as amended.
Thank you, ma'am. I see two other hands, Ms. Conlon and then Ms. Agostino. Let's go to Ms. Conlon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Katie Conlon, Precinct 3. I think I heard the moving party state that the select board had not posted a notice on one of our agendas that we were going to be acting on this topic of increasing the size of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. That is not correct. We did have many discussions on this. I took a quick look just now on the town website. The select board's January 12th, 2022 agenda includes item 8A, Romanet 7, which includes an article to increase the size of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. So I want to clarify that the select board had numerous discussions about town meeting articles for this town meeting throughout the winter and spring months. This item appeared on many agendas, and there was discussion and a vote on the topic. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Okay. Thank you. I see Ms. Agostino, I think you're at your 10-minute limit. I'll open this up, but please be brief with your question.
I actually posted the request. You quickly read the rules and the point of order, not the discussion that I was raising, which can be very trying for town meeting members to have to listen to the back and forth on point of orders. In the point of order, the rules that you quickly read, if you're raising a point regarding illegal, if you read it so quickly that
yes, I'll read that again. Yes, it says, is any pending action frivolous, irrelevant, illegal, or contrary to proper procedure? And my view is right now, the action is to reconsider this article. So do you think there's anything illegal going on about their reconsideration of this article or moving to reconsider? I don't.
And to the point of order that I have stated, and maybe it has not come through clearly, is that the governing article of 2014, Article 13, clearly did require the select board and the planning board. And while as I stated, open meeting law, it's not just frivolous. It's how we base everything on. So I went to both committees and spent most of today waiting for responses. I did read the minutes. And the reason I read the lengthy article was so that you would see we're talking about the process and the legal need to have an open meeting law to make sure of the language in these articles. Well, this was amended. And, sometimes when you try to make your point, sometimes, I will finish. Sometimes when you try to make a point, you pretty much shoot yourself in the foot because people don't want to hear it any longer. You're right. This has gone on too long, but the open meeting law and the article do govern this. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to remind the members, the point of order is the uninterruptible and most important sort of motion in town meeting time. It is there so that you can question the process going on right now, not a reason to to do something about that process. So the process going on right now is deciding whether to reopen 17. Whether 17 has a problem is something we discuss if we reopen 17. That's why I'm disagreeing with the speaker's point that there is something illegal going on, and this is not a valid point of order. It's a discussion on the art of motion. So at this point, we've heard from the planning board and the select board. I'd like to recognize Chair Asher of the Warrant Committee. Warrant Committee, what is your view on the motion to reconsider?
Mr. Moderator, the Warrant Committee has not taken a vote to reconsider. I just want to point out that the original Article 17 was approved at our March 7th meeting, which was an open meeting. Are we required to give an opinion on the reopening of this?
No, this is just a process motion, I think, not a content.
As far as the Warrant Committee is concerned, we executed our responsibility in an open meeting according to the article that was presented to us in good faith that it was properly referred to us.
Okay, thank you, sir. At this point, I'm going to move to a vote. This requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor, by the way, we are voting on the motion to reconsider 17. That's all at this point. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute the phones. Can we put up the poll results? So the motion fails by a vote of 40 yeses at 20%, 157 noes at 77%, and 5 abstains at 3%. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to move to entertain the following motion before we go to Articles 13 and 14. I want to see if in the chat a member would support the following motion to appoint Mr. Brian Walsh as temporary moderator for the consideration of Articles 13 and 14. Is there a support for that with a so moved and a second?
Make sure there's a duplicate person there.
Okay, thank you. I see there's a so moved by Mr. Sybeck and a second by Mr. Matthews. And our Zoom admin says we have a
hi, Veronica McCarthy.
I've got Vicky here. Is Vicky at home today? She's here.
You are in the Zoom meeting twice. We just need you to raise your hand on whichever device you are using to vote. If you are indeed logged in twice, but there's only one person who's a town meeting member, please. Veronica McCarthy.
Gone? Okay. All right, problem solved. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote. We put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. We can unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Very good. Let me know we have the votes. We can close the poll. We close the poll? Yep, okay. The motion carries 173 yeses at 89%, 15 noes at 7%, and 7 abstains at 4%. So with that, I'll step aside. Mr. Walsh, gavel's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Walsh, town meeting member from Precinct 8, and now your temporary moderator. And I will tell you it's a pleasure to have this opportunity. So as town meeting knows, we're actually going to consider Articles 13 and 14. And Article 13 is to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money for the purchase or lease of electronic voting equipment for the use at town meeting and determine how said sum will be raised and expended and to act on anything related thereto. It was submitted by the select board and it is recommended that the town vote to appropriate $30,000 from funds certified by the Department of Revenue as free cash for the purchase or lease of electronic voting equipment for use at town meeting. Does anyone wish to speak to this motion?
Yes, I can start, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Hish, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you. Bob Hiss, town meeting member, due to being a town moderator. If we could put up the presentation, or warrant committee clerk, please. Thank you. If we could go to the second slide. So there's four things that I wanted to explain about both Articles 13 and 14 tonight. One, the consideration of the two together, the report of the Electronic Voting Committee from a few years ago. Why is this being reopened now? What are the costs involved? And the next steps to proceed. If we can go to the next slide. The consideration for articles tonight. Some members have asked, why are we doing the funding question first and then the adoption of the bylaws? The reason is if we approve the funding and you rejected the bylaw change, then the money could just sit there and be unspent. But if we approve the bylaw and we didn't have the funds, electronic voting could not go forward. So that's why we're doing them in the sequence we're doing them. They will be separate votes. I believe that's how the moderator is going to handle it, but that's why we're talking about them together in this sequence. Next slide, please. So back in 2019, I appointed an electronic voting committee. You can see the members here is chaired by Mr. Frank Schroth. It also had the town clerk, two members, Kathleen Lavery and Mr. Shields, who was a former select board member as well, and Rob Mallet of IT. What they were charged with is to research the possibility of electronic voting, to identify where it was happening in the town, in the state rather, to find out which towns were doing so, what their satisfaction was, and to ultimately come back with a recommendation to me, and then to bring to the select board about whether to go adopt it permanently for the town. We go to the next slide. So what they reported is that they found that they had actually seen videos of town doing voting. So this is all pre-Zoom, so we hadn't seen what this was like. So they got to watch it in action. They were able to survey town moderators and clerks across the state, both representative town meetings and with open town meetings. They looked at the way they had studied the issue, the bylaw changes they'd put out. In particular, you can see there were some that are near to us, Arlington, Brookline, Belmont, Natick. They talked to town officials here in Milton. You can see the list that's there. They did a poll of residents. Mr. Schroth told me it was about 100 residents. They were town meeting members and residents to see what they thought. And then they talked to the three leading vendors in the market that serve Massachusetts and to get some preliminary, just indicative bids of what it would cost to either lease/rent the equipment or to buy the equipment. And the final statement from 2019 is summarized in the blue box in the bottom. It said the committee recognized the merits of the technology, but because of concerns about Milton's financing back in 2019, about half the residents said we're concerned enough with the financing, and half said, is this the right priority at this time? So they said, we like the idea, but not now. And so they reported that back to me. I presented it to the select board, and the select board agreed to stand down until some future date when priority rose and the finances became more acceptable. The committee had some pictures of what the clickers look like if we're sitting in a live auditorium. So these are two of the vendors. It's Meridia on the right and Option Technology. Meridia on the left and Option Technologies on the right. So you can see on the left-hand side, they have simple green, red, yellow buttons for yes, no, abstain. On the right, they use digits 1, 2, 3. So there's simple clicker technologies. They're wireless devices. It operates in a closed network inside the auditorium. And for that regard, it's relatively secure. It doesn't lend itself to a hybrid model, by the way. Everyone would have to be present inside a single building. So then the question is, why bring this forward now in 2022? So a few things. Through the Zoom webinars, we have been experiencing electronic voting for, prior to this, 6 different town meetings. And I think you've seen we haven't had any votes challenged with a standing vote or a roll call vote or a quorum call. The town clerk gets precise voting results, and so she even gets exact voting counts, which are important for her and her precision. In finances, you heard Chairman Doyle speak about ARPA funding that is relieving some of the pressure in this year's funding. And we'll hear later on, we saw the CPA allocation the other night. The CPA, as it goes forward, will allow the town to do other things and further release some funding. The adoption is increasing across the Commonwealth, particularly among the representative town meetings. So the table at the right is the most recent status that I obtained through the Mass Moderators Association. So 11% of the total towns, only 9 of the OTM, the open town meetings, the RTM of the representative town meetings, which is what we are. And you can see 12 of 32 representative town meetings, almost 40% are adopting this. And so it is continuing to gain steam and momentum. The last item is costs. In January, Rob Mallett of the committee went back to the same 3 vendors, Meridia, Turning Point, and Option Technologies, and asked them, based on 300 devices, would you, and a certain number of town meetings, because the pricing for varies with town meeting under a leasing case versus a purchase case, tell us what it would cost to buy the system outright. And if we did that, we'd factor in costs of the IT staff to change batteries and to help us set up in the high school. And you'd have periodic refreshes of the technology. Every 5 or 6 years, things die, and you'd have to probably buy new equipment. If you leased it, the vendors come and they show up. They bring all the equipment. They bring their staff. So there's no labor cost to the town, but there is a per night cost. So if we have a 5-night annual town meeting, 2 nights in the fall, 2 nights in the spring, that's the 9-night worst case. You see the budget, and this is the cost. This is back in January, could be over $100,000 to rent. It would be about that point about $32,000 to own in the worst case. The best case, you can see it goes down to 55 to 19, and the expected case where we might have 3 nights of an annual when we're back in person, and then a 2-night fall town meeting. You can see it's $75,000 to rent versus $26,000 to own. So I presented this information back to the select board. They asked me some follow-up questions. I went to find that. I further surveyed other towns. Did you have any regrets? And the only regrets were some towns had been leasing and they found it expensive, so they went to purchase. Some had done what I said. They'd purchased again. Nobody had gone backwards in their decision. So if the body decides to go forward with this tonight, a few things. The top, we'd have to reconvene the committee and make vendor procurement adoption decisions. And they would do so following the procurement guidelines of the town. You can see on the left the penetration of the various vendors across the town. The leading ones are Meridia, that has about 3, Option Technologies with 11, and Turning Technologies with 12. There's some others where the towns didn't respond, but these are some of the leading vendors. You can see there's more purchase than lease amongst the various towns, so more towns are buying than otherwise. I would reconstitute the committee to help with the purchase decision. They would get updated proposals from the various vendors, do the typical things we do: demo, reference check. They select, negotiate, procure, following all the town practices, and then we would run a test vote at the next town. So with that, Mr. Moderator, those are my prepared remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Does anyone else wish to speak to this motion? Seeing none, I'd I apologize. Getting accustomed to my technology here. I apologize. There you go. The hands. I see. Yep. I see Peter Mullen. You wish to be recognized?
Peter Mullen, Precinct 2. I had a few questions with regard to this article. Who would end up making the decision as to what technology to purchase? That's one question. The second question is, as I understand the technology, each member would be issued a device when they come to town meeting. And they'd have the device that night, they'd be able to use it to vote. And then they'd turn it in at the end of the evening, and it would get issued to again the following evening if the meeting went 2 nights or 3 nights, however many it was. whether I'd be interested in knowing what the town clerk's view is with regard to that process, whether her office is going to be the ones issuing the devices, and whether they think it'll create problems for the beginning of town meeting. One of the problems I've had with regard to the Zoom meetings is when the tabulation comes up, I vote, but I don't know how my vote is being recorded. I know that in some of the electronic voting systems, there's a display board with people's names up, and a member can see how they vote on the board at the front of the hall. If they're voting yes, it's usually a green light, and if they're voting no, it's usually a red light. Do any of these systems include such a feature? And if not, is there would that be some additional cost? And if so, what would the cost be?
All right. I'm sorry. Is that that's actually three questions, Mr. Mullen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Mullen's first question was, who will make the decision on which technology to purchase if the decision is positive tonight? I believe in the presentation I heard from Mr. Hiss, he mentioned he would go back to that committee. But Mr. Hiss, I'd recognize you for response to that question.
Yes, I'd recommend that ultimately this is an executive body decision of making a procurement. The moderator's not empowered to buy anything. So I think the chief procurement officer should come back with a recommendation as informed by the electronic voting committee and recommend to the select board the vendor to purchase.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hiss. Mr. Mullen, his second question, as I understand it, was each member would get issued this electronic device for example, let's say the first night of town meeting. And the question is, do you turn it in at the night's end and get issued another one on the second night?
Yes, that's the way this works in all the towns. So the devices are controlled by either the vendor on a rental model or by the town under an ownership model. So yes, there would be a check-in procedure because they want to assign a specific device to a specific person, which probably gets to Mr. Mullen's third question. So if John Doe is a elected town meeting member, they would get issued device 1, 2, 3, and then in the records, the town clerk would know how John Doe voted on a particular motion or article because they're tied to that device for that night. And then when they leave, they return the device back to the staff. By the way, in our costing model, we know the town clerk's office is stretched, so we put in overtime for the IT department to help with managing the devices. So under the supervision of the clerk, issuing them out and helping to collect them, resolving any issues, keeping them charged with batteries, et cetera. So that's in the ownership model and not in the rental model, because in the rental model, it's provided by the vendor.
So Mr. Hiss,
and
the
third,
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go on the third was, yes, the technology, it's at the, yes, you can put the live on the screen. You can see the live vote occurring. And there are options by vendor. I haven't gone through the specs of each individual vendor. That would be the voting committee. But if that was an important requirement, you could actually see people's votes scrolling up on the screens live should the meeting wish to operate that way.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Mr. Mullen, I recall you said something about the clerk. Did you wish to hear whether the clerk is supportive of this approach? Is that the question?
I assume that she was going to be issuing the devices. So I think it would be helpful to hear from her.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Galvin?
Thank you, Susie Galvin, Town Clerk. Mr. Mullen, thank you for your question and your thoughtfulness of my arguments. I can't hear you. Oh, you're very.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
That's better, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't have my speaker close enough. So thank you, Mr. Mullen, for your question. In the proposal from the EV department, we did think of the added resources, and it will be a shared responsibility between IT and my department. And I think that we would be able to handle it and work out a mechanism that would be beneficial for both town meeting members, my staff, and the IT department. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen, are you all set, or did you wish to follow up?
I'd like to follow up on one matter with regard to what Mr. Hiss had to say. He mentioned that devices would be assigned to a particular member, and there'd be a record as to how that member voted. I'm wondering whether that's going to be a record that's preserved. Is it a public record? Would it get published as part of the report of the annual town meeting in the annual report? I wonder if any of those questions have been addressed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mullen. In fact, I was going to suggest that, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Hiss. I was going to suggest, first, is there a sense that those items have been addressed? And secondly, if they have, how were they addressed? So, Mr. Hiss, you're recognized.
Yeah, the detailed, let's call it user procedures for the town meeting, I think are still things to be worked out based on the vendor that's selected. But the electronic voting committee said one of the benefits that the respondents and other towns found was the fact that for representative town meetings, they nearly universally, I think, did record on a permanent basis the vote on each article in motion by member. And usually the open town meetings, they like it because they use a secret ballot. So there was strong support from the 100 respondents for the record you would get with electronic voting.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Mr. Mullen, I assume that addresses your question.
I assume so. I mean, I don't know whether or not that's going to be reported in the annual town report. I mean, we vote on a huge number of procedural motions and other things in town meeting. It seems like there'd be a huge increase in the size of the annual report.
Mr. Hiss, I suspect that a decision like that probably has not been made. And Mr. Mullen's observation, a very wise one, would certainly be taken under consideration when those decisions are made.
That would be my advice. For example, it's up to the executive branch of the town to produce that report and decide what goes in it. I think that would be largely up to them whether they wanted to produce that kind of volume or have it available upon demand, or perhaps put it on the town website where it costs nothing extra to go post.
Mr. Moderator, if I could, one other question.
So, Mr. Mullen, I'll entertain one more question, but I'd like to point out we have a number of other speakers waiting, so I'd like to move on. Perhaps state your question quickly.
In the recommendation authorizes either the lease or the purchase. I know the recommendation is to do a purchase, but I'd like the actual recommendation that we're voting on would authorize either one.
At the dollar amounts, yes. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. At the dollar amounts, the 30,000 would only be sufficient for a purchase. It wouldn't be sufficient for, or I should restate, it would be sufficient for the purchase for 5 years or the lease for 1 year.
So, Mr. Hiss, is it your belief that because this is going to go back to a committee and decisions will then be made, that the flexibility of either purchase or lease should remain here in the recommendation?
I believe so, but obviously that's up to town meeting. So we ran the math on first year. For example, the worst case first year rental would be about $20,000, which would be within the 30, obviously. And then the case for the 5 year summary to purchase would be $30,000.
So, Mr. Mullen, unless you are interested in making a motion to amend, I think that explanation is clear and there's flexibility in that, the way it's stated currently.
I have no motion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Next, we have Jill Clark. Jill, you wish to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jill Clark, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. Prior to moving to Milton, I had the opportunity to serve the town of Belmont as a town meeting member, where we did use the electronic voting technology. I found it to be useful, efficient, and strongly recommend the passage of both Article 13 and Article 14. If I may just very briefly describe some of the process, which I think might help answer some of the previous members' questions. When town meeting members arrived, there were tables set up by precinct where people signed in and received a device that was specific to them and labeled with their name. There was no log jam. It was very efficient and went very quickly. At the time of voting, as described, there was a screen that displayed that the member had voted, but not what the member's vote was. So people could confirm that their votes had been recorded. It did not immediately record people's votes until I sponsored an article, which it required a bylaw change to record members' votes. But we did make that bylaw change and record members' votes. The exact members' votes were available by the next day at the town clerk's office or on the website, but were not published in the annual report. Thank you. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And thank you for letting Milton benefit from your experience as a town meeting member for another town. Appreciate that. Next, waiting to be recognized, Deborah Felton. Felton, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, Deborah Felton, Precinct 2. I would like to ask if a voting application was ever considered. Many of us voted at a convention last Saturday where we downloaded an app to our telephone, and it was very easy and votes came up very quickly. So just wondering if that was considered as an alternative. And there was, if people did not have a smartphone, there was an alternative way for people to vote. So that was taken into consideration. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. Hiss, can you address Felton's question?
Yes, I'm looking at the report that the Electronic Voting Committee submitted back in 2019. Their concerns were on in system security. They said, if I get the exact voting integrity, they did, let's see, I think they said no town had implemented for example, smartphone-based application voting due to difficulties with both authentication. As you can see with Zoom, we spend a lot of time focusing on that. And just security of the overall system, which would be operating on more of a public network like the internet or cellular network. So they recommended going with one of these closed systems instead of a smartphone or computer-based system, just due to security.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Actually, we have a member of that committee here in the room. Mr. Mallon, I'd ask him to respond to the consideration that was given.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was on this committee. I'm the interim IT director at the moment. The biggest security problem we saw was if it was an app and someone sent it to a friend outside the committee or just anyone who was not allowed to vote, then we're representing a town meeting and we can't afford that risk. So we used the enclosed system where it had to be handheld devices, the single common where everyone's on the same playing field. So we couldn't use smartphones. We couldn't start mixing and matching a smartphone with a clicker because we couldn't risk an app or just a link being used outside of the town.
And for those members who don't know you, if you just state your name.
Robert Mallett.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't know if Ms. Felton is still there, but did that address your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you. I see next, wishing to be recognized, Brian Kelly. You are recognized.
Yes, this is similar to the last speaker's comment about smartphone. Well, we don't have to get an app. Why don't we just use Zoom on our smartphones, do a Zoom meeting at a live meeting where when we vote with the poll. So in the same technology we're using, the same security we've already approved, and it wouldn't cost us any money except for the current expense of what you're spending now for a Zoom meeting now. And also, we wouldn't have to collect it. I'm on my smartphone right now. I'm voting on my smartphone tonight. Now, the screen isn't as big as a computer, but we wouldn't need a big screen to see all the articles because we'd be seeing them on the main screen at the town meeting. We wouldn't have to worry about technology updates because Zoom will do that for us. And I think it would probably work just as well or even better, and it'd be very low cost.
Yeah, I'd recognize our previous speaker to address the question. Rob Mallett.
Robert Mallett, Interim IT Director. At the time when we researched this, we didn't look at Zoom. This is pre-pandemic, so it wasn't really a consideration as much. We were looking at an actual voting system. It would something that would have to be reconsidered by the committee. One of the concerns I'd have were not only do you have everyone's own devices, people could have their sound on. Then you get to the point, what if someone didn't have a smartphone, would be buying tablets for the difference, and a tablet's going to cost a lot more than a clicker. It could be considered by the committee when they eventually reconvene, if this is approved. But at the time, this was not looked into to use Zoom as the voting platform.
Thank you, Mr. Mallett. Mr. Kelly, did you wish a follow-up?
I would just ask that the committee consider looking at Zoom now because we've already proven that it works and it might be the best of both worlds. So that's all. I'd just like them to consider that.
Very good, Mr. Kelly. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was looking one ahead. Robert Kelly, you wish to be recognized? You're recognized.
Can you hear me, Mr. Moderator?
Yes, I can.
All right, thank you, sir. Bob Kelly, member, Precinct 7. It sounds as though this cake may be already baked, but I would urge members to vote no. Number one, I heard mention of overtime or potential overtime, and based on the previous two town meetings, there's a substantial amount of overtime being expended by the town already in other departments. And I think, frankly, there's enough overtime for those departments. I don't think the town needs to be spending even more money on overtime. Also, if this is approved, I think you're potentially looking at Pandora's box. We don't know what kind of issues may arise down the road. And I think one potential issue, if this is approved, is we could have longer meetings if we have all this voting. And I think everybody would agree we don't need longer meetings. They're far long enough presently. So,
Mr. Kelly, if I could, and I
yes.
only do this for health and clarity, I would think the assumption is it's not going to be more votes. It's just a change in the way the votes are taken.
Right, but we have. I've been a member for about a decade. We've never even come close to a roll call vote. So, finally.
So again, Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
I believe, and I'll ask Mr. Hiss to listen carefully to me and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it would still be a question put before the body. Everyone would have their electronic device, and they would respond yes or no or abstain, and it would be treated just as the initial vote with the tally. Mr. Hiss, is that a correct interpretation, and would that not require more voting?
If I understand your question, are you saying how would the electronic voting work on each article?
Yeah. So the question, the town meeting member is suggesting, Mr. Kelly, that perhaps using electronic devices would result in more voting because he's thinking that most of our votes now are not requiring a standing vote or even roll call vote, and so consequently, the assumption is that this is more voting. My interpretation, and this is where I want to make sure that I'm not providing inaccurate information, is the same motion for vote would be made to the body and they would vote at one time, and the tally would then just be given. So it wouldn't be like it's an automatic move to a similar to a standing vote or similar to a roll call.
Yes, what other towns have done is first, they, in terms of duration of the vote, they limit it to 30 seconds. And at the end of 30 seconds, the moderator closes the voting and they present it. Because they can put the results up, when we have a voice vote, 7 can stand and question the moderator's opinion of the voice vote. The electronic voting eliminates the standing count because you have the results displayed right in front of you, as the prior member from Belmont said. And third, I was not aware, and maybe Mr. Mallett or Ms. Galvin heard of a town that had a roll call. But if you're recording the vote by member, because you have an assigned device by member, then if someone calls theoretically for a roll call, you could produce the results on the website, you could present it up on the screen, et cetera. So I think you'd eliminate the standing votes in exchange for the 30 seconds per vote.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Mr. Kelly, I hope you realize my interjection was only in the attempt to help for clarification. Do you have a follow-up?
Just a concluding remark. I'd rather see the town spend $30,000 on planting trees or give that money to the residents fund or hire an enforcement officer. I don't think this is money well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Appreciate it. Stephen Kelleher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Kelleher, Precinct 8. I'd like to propose an amendment to this article. I agree with the previous speaker regarding convention this past weekend. Many of town meeting members attended it. It was a convention with over 4,000 delegates that voted electronically. What I'd like to propose, I feel this language is limiting. So what I'd like to propose is after the word equipment, adding or iPhone application.
Okay.
That way it opens it up. I feel this language is very limiting. And I think another speaker also spoke about whether it's Zoom or other applications, having that ability to look at other options.
Okay, Mr. Kelleher, and we have to be careful that we get precise language. You're essentially, and this is for the whole body, you're making a motion to amend. Ultimately, it'll have to be seconded, but just hold that thought for a minute. You're saying that after the word electronic, you want a comma, and would you precisely say how that phrase said?
Or iPhone application. I believe it was after the word equipment.
Well, can I suggest when you say or iPhone app, you might want to say smartphone application. There's certainly a number of people that have Android-based smartphones. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Sure. So or a smartphone application.
Sure. That sounds great.
And then after that phrase, or smartphone application, and the comma again, voting equipment for use at town meeting.
Correct.
So we have a motion to amend. It will require a second, but if you'll give the moderator a minute, there's a clarification I have to make on a procedural issue. Hold on. Do we need to clarify that now? So it's my understanding we have a question about clarifying who's on a particular phone. Sir, do you want to?
Hello, the phone in town meeting member whose phone number ends in 019. Could you please identify yourself? Phone number ending in 0. Oh, there you are.
Two guys, Precinct 9.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
019.
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Precinct 9. George Tugayas, Precinct 9.
Thank you very much.
Very good, Mr. Bill.
Welcome.
You guys. Okay, so everyone, we have a motion to amend. And the amendment again is after the word electronic to say or smartphone application. We need a second in order to move further in this. Does anyone second that motion? I see Ms. Agostino, you have seconded the motion. So now for the benefit of the body, we are now considering not the entire recommendation, but just the motion to amend. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion to amend? I see Mr. Fruse, you are asking if it could be accepted as a friendly amendment. Excellent question. This is it's submitted by the select board. So I would wait to hear whether the select board would accept this as a friendly amendment, and then the support or the vote of the warrant committee. So folks, if you'll hold on 1 minute, it could save us a lot of time if you give me a minute now. Thank you.
We get out next summer. We're here till next Thursday. Oh, 100%. We had to touch schools. We haven't done the schools. Yeah. Is this the word you guys?
And Agostino reopened all articles.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all. Mr. Kelleher, I went to find see if the select board would support or what the position was on your motion to amend. And they have actually suggested they think something that would be clearer and more helpful than your change. And they want to see if you would be comfortable with that. So they're suggesting, and let me get the exact, after the word electronic equipment, instead of saying, I apologize, let me get back specifically to it. Yeah, so after the word electronic, they're suggesting just add hardware or software in voting equipment for the use of town meetings. So change your suggestion of or smartphone application to hardware or software, which they felt would be more general and probably more advantageous. Mr. Kelleher, how would you feel about that?
Mr. Moderator, I agree with that because again, that provides more options. So I like that idea.
Okay, so we did have your motion to amend, and we had somebody second that. I believe it was Mrs. Agostino. Mrs. Agostino, are you comfortable with the change? And actually, folks, just hold on one more.
I just said second. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can you hold on just one more minute? Thank you, folks. I'm trying to keep this moving as fast as possible. What I just went and clarified, it's been the practice at this town meeting that if a motion to amend is made and seconded but hasn't been debated in the original requester has agreed to a change and the person that seconded has agreed to that change, that we can in fact entertain that motion without having to satisfy the first motion to amend. So the motion before the body is to add the word hardware or software after the word electronic in the recommendation. That's been made and seconded. Is there any debate on that? I apologize. I should add that your select board has voted to support that motion. And they are the submitters of the article. It's actually a friendly amendment. So I apologize. I'm getting back in my feet all here. We just need now, we don't have to take a full vote. Thanks to Mr. Fruz's recommendation. We just need to hear the position of the Warrant Committee.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, sir, you are recognized.
George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. The Warrant Committee unanimously supports this change and recommends it to town meeting.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Asher. And so for the body, the recommendation before you is it's recommended the town vote to appropriate $30,000 from funds certified by the Department of Revenue as free cash for the purchase or lease of electronic hardware or software voting equipment for use at town meeting. Does anyone else wish to speak to this motion? Virginia King, you're recognized. Oh. So apologize, your moderator went out of order there, and since wasn't responsive, Deborah Milbar, you have your hand raised, you are recognized.
Hi, Mr. Moderator. Thank you very much. Deborah Milbauer, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. So my question has to do with process. I'm wondering who and how it will be decided that we'd have transparent voting. Can you hear me?
I didn't hear the end of that. Who or how, and what was the rest of that?
Sorry. It's a process question, and I'm wondering who and how it will be decided if we have transparent voting. It sounds to me like there's a few different methods. So previous speaker said, you put it up and you can see that they voted, but not what they voted. You can have it available the next day. You could put it up on the screen and you could see. So this is a huge change. And I'm wondering, will the committee decide that? Will this come back to town meeting as an article? It's a pretty big, significant change. I'm not for or against. I'm just trying to assess what the process would be.
Thank you, Ms. Milbar. Mr. Hiss, would you be able to weigh in on that?
Yes. I think there's a couple approaches. Some towns put this entirely under the decision of the moderator in how it's implemented. Others get quite prescriptive. And so it could be the electronic voting committee comes back and recommends, let's call it a full procedure, and brings that back to the town or to town meeting to adopt as a rule. But I think the electronic voting committee would be charged with working out the details based on the capabilities of the technology, particularly since the friendly amendment has now opened it up to different types of voting technology not evaluated by the committee in their first pass.
And so, Mr. Hiss, if I could summarize, and please, if I'm not correct, tell me so. I believe what you're saying is the committee would review all this and then make a recommendation, but ultimately the moderator would probably make the decision and advise town meeting?
I think it's up to town meeting to decide the details of the procedure. At least that would be my advice. Some towns put that in the hands of the moderator. Others ask for much more prescriptive rules. As I think you saw, Belmont has a very prescriptive process per the other member answer to a question.
Sure. All right, thank you. So I guess, Ms. Milbar, that would mean that there'd be more work to be done on that, basically. Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah. So the question is, how would, I guess, the process of how we would decide it would be hashed out in the committee, and then would that process be approved somehow? In other words, I'm just trying to sort out
if I
how and when this will happen.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but if I interpreted Moderator Hiss's comments as the moderator, he would listen to the recommendations of the committee, but he would have that discussion and expect the town meeting to support which approach would be used. Is that fair, Mr. Hiss?
Yes.
Thank you. Did that help, Ms. Milbar?
I still have questions, but that's okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
All right, thank you. Oh. And Virginia King, if you still wish to be recognized, you are recognized. All right, I'll assume not. Leroy Walker, you are recognized. Jesus. Oh, I'm sorry.
What's going on here?
I apologize. Is this Miss King?
Yes, it is.
I apologize. I didn't hear you and I wasn't sure. You
heard my utterance, right? Okay. Sorry about that, folks. I shouldn't have done that.
No.
This sounds like we're looking for a solution to a problem that we don't have. Although the recommendation of the warrant committee is to vote for this article, its reasons in its comment are pretty weak. My guess is that their vote on this was pretty equally divided for and against the article, which we should make note of. The first reason listed in the warrant committee's comment was for the, quote, efficiency and timeliness of future town meetings, end quote. However, exactly where that efficiency and timeliness would be realized is not at all clear. Technology does not always make things more efficient. And the case in point could be the technical difficulties that we've had, or not technical difficulties, but just differences that in can you hear me now and things like that. Have you unmuted yourself? Things along that line. that we've had in the last couple of years using the webinar platform with Zoom rather than the in-person meeting we usually have. Now, while I'm very grateful for the technology that has allowed us to conduct town meeting while preserving our health during the pandemic, it has increased the duration of the town meeting, at least a little bit, if not more. Let's see. So exactly how electronic voting will increase the efficiency and timeliness of future town meetings is not at all guaranteed. Even if it were guaranteed, is that efficiency and timeliness worth $30,000? I'm pretty sure that it isn't, especially after hearing the added overtime money needed for the distribution of and collection of devices each night. The second reason giving in the warrant committee comment is that electronic voting will provide, quote, an exact tally, end quote, of the vote immediately. Yet an exact tally has never been needed. Is very rarely needed. Votes that could not be determined by voice, we have a standing vote. And I can count on one hand, maybe two hands or part of two hands, the number of standing votes that I've seen in my 25 years of being a town meeting member. And I don't remember any roll call votes in all that time. A tally is only needed on a very close vote. The majority of articles need only a simple majority or a 2/3 vote. Usually this can be determined from a voice vote. When it can't be so determined, we have a standing vote that might take 10 or 15 minutes, but they don't happen often enough to add up to needing something that we're going to spend this much money on. As I said, standing votes do not happen often, so exactly where is the need for the exact tally when the vast bulk of our voting doesn't need it? Is an exact tally worth $30,000? Again, I'll answer that. It is not. Also keep in mind that if we vote to spend money on electronic voting, you can be sure there will be other costs associated with it. For example, we've already talked about tonight about distributing and then collecting them, eventually replacing it with future generations of some electronics that we don't know exist yet and probably won't even need then. And we talked about the overtime that's going to be needed from the town clerk's office. I urge all of my fellow town meeting members to balance these very slim possibilities for a benefit from electronic voting against the $30,000 plus we are voting about spending it tonight and the further inevitable costs down the road. Now, that being said, I do have two specific questions. How much overtime would be budgeted for issuing and collecting the devices and for the technical staff that would be needed to be running it? That's number one. And the second is going back to the article where we had talked about the budget of the town clerk's office going up rather steeply in this year's warrant. And that was because we were talking about that, and that seemed to be because of early voting. And I'm wondering if that big jump also covers the extra overtime and so forth that's going to be associated with this article as well. So I'd like the answers on those two things, please.
Okay, thank you, Ms. King. And Ms. King, I'd like to just add a comment to what you made as a way to help provide even more clarification for town meeting members, especially those that are the new over the last 2 years. In my experience at town meeting, Ms. King is correct. It's not often we have a standing vote, but I recall at least a half a dozen. I've been around for 30 years. And even during my time as moderator, beyond a standing vote, a roll call vote happened twice. And Ms. King is right. It's a timely procedure. Roll calls always took approximately 1 hour. So I'm just adding that for clarification, Ms. King. Now let me try to pursue getting your questions answered. Yeah. Recognize Susan Galvin, our town clerk. Would you like to repeat the questions?
That would be wonderful, Mr. Moderator.
Okay.
Thank you.
So how much overtime for issuing and collecting the devices should we go with this recommendation? Has that been worked out or any thought to that?
That has not been discussed or added to my budgets at all.
Okay, so that amount has not been determined, Ms. King. And then
I guess that takes care of the second question then.
Okay, thank you.
That would not be in the budget. So that's something that we're going to have to add to the budget down the road in addition to that $30,000. And I was wondering what that might be, if there is a guesstimate on it?
Can I speak on the overtime?
Yes, Mr. Mallard, you recognized. He was on the committee.
Hi, Robert Mallett, interim IT director. So when the proposed 30,000 was put in, the overtime was actually based on my overtime, which averages out about $41 an hour. So, a typical week of town meeting might be about $500, just as a ballpark. Obviously, town meeting varies up and down, but you'd say $41 an hour. And if it comes time and a half, it's, was that about 62, something like that offhand. But that's where that number came from for overtime. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mallard. Ms. King, did that help?
I'm not sure. That was for.
That was.
I'm not
basically,
sure.
Mr. Mallard was saying that he also provides support at town meeting as IT support, and he was sharing the costs that they've experienced with him. It has some relative merit, I guess, to the town clerks, but it's certainly not a science.
But that we're not talking. There's other overtime that would be associated with this more than Mr. Mallett's the prior speaker's time.
That is perhaps very true.
Perhaps a person for each precinct handing out devices or recording who has which device.
Sure.
And do we have an idea of what that might cost?
I'm looking at the town clerks, and she's basically indicating, no, we don't have an idea of that cost.
Well, I just urge the members to remember that is an unknown cost that we will have to deal with as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. And Leroy Walker, you are indeed recognized this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Precinct 10. This is just a clarifying question. So the friendly amendment was accepted as...
because I don't...
That's right. It was accepted
as a friendly amendment, and this is now the main motion on which I hope we will be voting momentarily. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, and thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Douglas Hine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Doug Hine, Precinct 2. I'll be very brief. I appreciate all the comments and the work of the town moderator and the committee. I had reluctantly urge a no vote on this article. And I say reluctantly because I'm all for streamlining efficiency in town meeting. But my chief concern really involves the fact that this is a system that we would not have used in the past 2 years. And there's uncertainty in my mind when, and I won't say if, but when it is that we are all going to be in the same room and actually use this technology. And I guess I'd feel better if we were voting on this article back in 2019 before the world went sideways, as opposed to now when we haven't been together for 2 years. And I would hate to purchase a system and then have it kind of sit on the shelf gathering dust and the warranty running, for who knows how long without being able to use it. So again, I like the idea behind this, but I don't think the timing is right, and the money can be used elsewhere a bit more effectively at this point in time. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Michael Chimman, you are recognized.
I'm very sorry. That was a mistake.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, sir. Christine Hodlin, you are recognized. Oh, I apologize, Christine. If you could hold on, I'm just in front of you is Scott Matthews. Scott Matthews, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Scott Matthews,
town meeting member, precinct 10. I just want to rise in support of this article to say that I'm planning to vote yes for it for multiple reasons. I think Mr. Hiss pointed out a little earlier about there's been some concerns about whether or not we have standing votes or roll call votes and some misinformation about how long they take. And I think that this system would help to eliminate that, I think, as was pointed out before. So thus making the potential for a faster town meeting. I sympathize with one of the previous speakers mentioning about, we don't know when we're coming back in. The plan was to come back in here. But I think it's best for us to move forward with a plan that we already had some time ago and not wait until we think we're exactly ready to come back in so that it is ready for us when we come back in. Because in all possibilities, we're going to come back in the end of the year for the spring town meeting. Also, and one of the main reasons that I rise in support of this is the transparency aspect. Because I know that talking to many people over the last few years, it is very frustrating to people who are trying to get their foot in understanding our town meeting process, our government process. We have the open meeting law where all our committees and boards are open and minutes are out there and people can, now go online. That's one of the benefits, I guess, from the pandemic, if you can find any benefit to attend these meetings. But when it comes to town meeting, it's hard for people to see how the representatives are representing them, right? And this option gives people a way to see that, to have better access to know how the representatives are representing them, to reach out. That we already have. It's very hard for people to reach their town meeting members. I think as much as we can to make it transparent, and I think there's other things in process of trying to find a way to reach out to town meeting members to make it easier for representatives to get to their constituents and vice versa. But I think this is another cog in the process that we need to make our system of government more open to people. Right. And so it makes them get more involved in the system. And I think that makes for a stronger town and a stronger government. So I'm going to leave it there in the interest of moving this question forward as much as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Christine Hodlin, you are now recognized. Christine, I see your hand is down now, so I'm going to assume that you do not wish to be recognized. Jay Fundling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Jay Fundling, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. A quick response to a couple of points that have been mentioned earlier. One is that this is giving our town government the ability to spend this money, not the requirement to buy it. If monkeypox starts spreading and we're not going to be meeting in person again, they're not compelled to buy equipment before we're supposed to meet. And also for those who are concerned about the $30,000, that it's too much. $30,000, I believe we've been hearing that this is expected to last for 5 years. So that's $6,000 per year. When we look at the budget, we are spending $292,000 on elections in this town. That's our democracy. An additional $6,000 for more transparency, as my colleague just said, seems to be well worth it to make a small amount to pay to make town meeting more transparent to the voters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Kevin Donahue, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kevin Donahue, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Briefly, I rise in support of this article. Those in attendance may recall the last town meeting in the spring, there was a great deal of discussion regarding the school budget. Having previously served on the school committee, in fact, just until up to that town meeting, I was involved with the planning discussion ahead of that meeting, and I can tell you that the results of the electronic voting were invaluable to us, realizing the margin immediately that the vote was lost probably saved the town meeting, the annual town meeting in spring 2021, about half hour's worth of time. So I think this is money well spent, and I think it is time well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Nicholas Tangney, you are recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. This is Nick Tagney. I'm at Precinct 3, and I'm against this motion. I think, simply put, this is a nice but not necessary expenditure of funds for a problem that's not really a problem. And I think in an environment where every budget dollar is important in the town of Milton and we have lots of competing priorities, we should spend money on things that are necessary and not nice. And I think this is one of those things that's definitely nice and not necessary. So I'm against this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, folks, I see no one else with the hand raised. Oh, I apologize. We do. Leroy Walker, you're recognized again since everyone else was finished for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I had hoped to simply vote in favor of this motion, but drawing on the sense of the room, I'm thinking maybe I need to make it clear why I'm in support of this motion. If we had had a conversation in 2019 about securing a technology that would allow us to conduct town meetings remotely, I'm betting we would be having the same kind of discussion where people said, why would we need to spend $30,000 for Zoom technology? We're probably not going to use it. So I think we're faced with the same technology question here. This is a technology that is proven, and it's a technology that I think we will need very soon. Not only that, town meeting members, I urge you to recall the number of times in the last 5 years when we were voting in person where there was a dispute about whether a voice vote was actually a 2/3 vote or whether a voice vote was a majority vote, in which case we would stop the meeting, assign monitors by section, have people stand if they voted in that section, yes or no, and those individuals would count. So we'd certainly realize an efficiency there. We would also realize an efficiency, as people have already articulated, if we needed to know by name how members voted, which I think the people that have elected us are entitled to know, particularly on those items, such as we've discussed in the last few months. For example, I think members and residents would be very interested to know how members voted on the accessory dwelling unit article. So I think it's crystal clear that this technology will provide us the transparency that's needed. I think it's crystal clear that it would create more efficiencies in the meetings where there's a dispute about a vote and we could get instantaneous results. And I think that clearly an expenditure of perhaps $5,000 of overtime for town meetings at most 3 times a year and more likely twice a year is money well spent. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Okay, folks, I have 2 more people with their hands raised. I want to point out that we've been discussing this for well over an hour. And the 2 hands raised, one of the hands, Virginia King, you've spoken previously. The second person, Michael Reardon, hasn't. So, Mr. Reardon, I'll recognize you first and then come back to you, Ms. King, if no one else is waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to point out a few things. Michael Reardon, Precinct 2. Number one, we're not talking about a $5,000 a year, et cetera, or $30,000. We're talking about the overtime and the other costs. So when we talk about efficiencies, there's going to be added inefficiencies that are going to be on the back end, on the backs of the people who work for the town. And so when we look at this on balance, we spent a lot of time arguing about $40,000 for a fire inspector. And I would agree with one of the previous speakers who mentioned this is nice to have, but I think it is a solution looking for a problem. And I think technology has changed dramatically since 2019. And I think it is well worth putting a committee together to review this and what the options are. But I think proceeding at this point, at this current time would be a bad decision. And I strongly urge people to vote no. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. So we have a few more hands now. And again, Ms. King, since you spoke, I'm going to move to those that haven't spoken yet. Mary Jane O'Doherty, I don't believe you have spoken. You're recognized. Did I get that right? Oh, I see lowered her hand. Carrie White, you're recognized.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mary Ann, is that you speaking?
Yes. Hi, Mary Jane.
Hi, you're recognized. My apologies. Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now fine.
Thank you. Mary Jane O'Doherty, Precinct 8. I am just requesting a motion to vote, please. Move this along.
I apologize. You're requesting a sense of the vote?
No, she wants. Requesting to vote.
Oh, you want to move the vote? Okay.
Yes.
All right. That's our town meeting. There are Robert's Rules of Order is slightly different than town meetings rules of order. Town meeting rules of order, they're first governed by town meeting time, which is mentioned at the beginning, and then other laws. We don't have a motion where you could move and then it recalls the vote to be made. But I think your intentions have been just clearly made to your fellow town meeting members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pardon me? We have a point of order. Oh, we have a point of order. Let's see. Okay. I've read the point of order. It's not a point of order. So I'm going to move to Virginia King. You're next. Oh, apologize. Well, let's go. Virginia King, you're next. You're recognized.
Virginia King, Precinct 3. I have a motion to amend. I would like to have this sent back for study so that we can know what the actual costs are going to be. I feel like this $30,000 is a little bit amorphous, and we know that it's going to be going up. And I think that the body needs to have a better idea of how much it's going to go up to see if it's something that they're willing to spend the money for. So I move that we send it back for study to get the full cost of what it will be, including all costs associated with overtime, et cetera.
Ms. King, as required by the rules of town meeting, then any significant motions should be provided in writing before the meeting.
Well,
I'm going to cut
that's a pity because I wasn't able to know that this didn't include all the overtime, et cetera. So I couldn't do that.
Ma'am, I understand. I'm going to try to help you with this.
Thank you.
So I believe, let me see if I can get this. You are making a motion to amend, so it's recommended that this article go back, and we usually identify who it goes back to. Presumably it's the study committee.
I would guess so, yes.
Go back to the, excuse me for 1 minute, Mr. Mallon. What's the name for this specific? Electronic Voting Committee? The Electronic Voting Committee. Okay, so go back to the Electronic Voting Committee and then you want them to reconsider anything in particular, Ms. King?
Yes, to ascertain what the total cost of procuring the technology will be and administering the technology.
So can I suggest, and you don't have to accept this, you might want to say to ascertain the total cost of implementing this recommendation.
Including overtime and other indirect costs.
Okay, including overtime. And how about other foreseen indirect costs?
That's fine. Reasonably foreseen.
Reasonably, thank you. That's even better. So I'm going to, Ms. King, if you pay attention, because I want your intent. I'm going to read what I have here to see if it passes your muster. You want to make a motion to amend this to read, recommend that this article go back to the electronic voting committee to ascertain the total cost implementing. And I can't even read my own writing here. Implementing this, including overtime and other reasonable foreseen indirect costs. Is that reasonable to be your motion?
And recurring costs.
Other foreseen indirect and recurring costs?
Yes, that will cover it.
Okay. All right. So, and again, one of the reasons we request it be submitted beforehand is we don't want to involve a lot of town meetings time drafting motions, but I think that was reasonable. I'm looking to see if that's been seconded, and I see Diane Agostino has seconded that. So now, folks, even though we just spent more than an hour on the other thing, what we're concentrating on right now is this motion to amend. And the motion to amend, which has been made and seconded, is to recommend that this article go back to the electronic voting committee to ascertain the total cost implementing this, including overtime and other reasonable, foreseen, indirect, and recurring costs. That's the motion now before the body. It's been made and seconded, and we're gonna focus all our comments now on that motion. Does anyone wish to speak to that motion? I see. It looks like Regina Malley. You're recognized.
I would not second that motion. I was going to suggest an amendment to include language. Oh, sorry, Regina Malley, Precinct 8. I was going to suggest an amendment that we include language that will give transparency of voting. So my view.
I apologize, but as your moderator, it's important for me to stop that discussion currently because frankly, there can only be one motion before the body at one time. And you could comment to the motion to amend that's currently before the body, or depending on the outcome of that, speak later as to your own thoughts.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay, finally, you're recognized. And again, you're recognized to speak to the motion to amend.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jay Fonling, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. I oppose this motion to amend. We are the person who made this motion to amend was questioning the cost, and if the cost is old and if the cost is current. We are approving town government to spend up to $30,000. We're not approving them to spend any more. They could spend less. Technology generally goes down in price, not up. Don't hold me to this, but it often does. So we're not in danger of spending any more than $30,000. And I don't want to delay in this. I want to approve this tonight, preferably in the next 15 minutes. It would be wonderful if we could move seamlessly from voting electronically at home to voting electronically in the high school. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that that's a motion. Hold on, let me explain. Yeah.
Excuse me, folks, if you would give the moderator a minute, discussing a technicality with town council. Thank you. Hello, folks. So, town meeting members, I've just spent time with town council that put out a extremely important point. This motion that we're debating, I had represented as a motion to amend, but because it's the intent is to refer it back, it's really governed by its own restrictions within town meeting time. This is a motion to refer back. Now, I'm certain that the presenter and the person that seconded that, they were in full support to do exactly that. So here's what's different. What's different is this motion to refer back, and I had the rest of that language is the same. If this motion passes, it will require a majority vote. If it passes, that's our last deliberation of this motion. And so just for clarity, I want to explain that. And before we move on, there's been a number of questions about some of the costs. And Bob Hiss has told me that he has some answers to that. So I'll recognize Mr. Hiss.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. If the warrant committee clerk could put up the spreadsheet. These are the detailed costs that we worked up in support of the recommendation to the select board. Let me just dream the way it's structured. At the top, there's really 3 swim lanes reading left to right. There's a worst case at the top. There's a best case in the middle, and there's an expected case down at the bottom. If you go down the left-hand column, that's the year 1 costs, where you're going to see differences between purchasing and leasing. And you go to the next major column to the right of the gray line, and that's the costs for summed between years 2 and 5. So, for example, if we look at the top left, worst case year 1, we budget in rentals. It would be based on the cost, the most expensive vendor we received in January. Over the first year, it would cost about $20,000 to rent an equipment for 9 nights of town meeting. You know, a 5-year annual, a 5-night annual, 2-night fall, 2-night winter. If we were to purchase it for 300 units, the price, the most expensive one was $11,500 to purchase it in year 1. You can see that in cell E7 there to the right of the word own. And down below that, we estimated overtime at $500 per night for all the staff that would be there that evening. So I think you heard Mr. Mallett's rate. So if he was there for 4 hours, it would be about $160. So we also had costs in there for the clerk. So for the worst case year, there would be $4,000 of overtime. So if you take the $11,500 to buy and the $4,000 of overtime, you get a $15,500 cost in the first year. And then if you go to the columns on the right, you see that $20,000 per year to rent is going to repeat each year. So over the 5 years, it's 5 times the $20,000 is $100,000. And then you don't have any marginal technology costs in years 2 to 5. You just have the same amount of overtime. So you take another $16,000 of overtime over 4 years, and you get to the $31,500 over the 5 years. So you can just, follow your eyes through. The best case, if we had a 1-night town meeting, 1-night fall, we spend $13,000 in year 1 and $19,000 over the whole term. And an expected case, you get $14,500 to purchase in the first year, and $3,000 a year after that, for a total of $26,500 over the 5 years. So those are the details behind those simple numbers in the summary report presented earlier. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Diane Agostino, you wish to be recognized? You're recognized.
Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Welcome back. I just wanted to clarify that that's what the intent was to refer back. However, then the word motion came in there. So do you need that reworded? Are you all set that everyone understands? We just once again heard something about numbers, but right now the motion simply is to refer back.
So thank you for asking that. I was going to clarify it for the entire body before we vote. And the town meeting time we're addressing, and we've got this ready, and there's some leeway. And I'm going to read the motion now that passes muster and I think meets the requirements of the original presenter. So the motion before the body is to motion to refer Article 13 to go back to the Electronic Voting Committee to ascertain the total cost implementing this, including overtime and other reasonable foreseen indirect and recurring costs. So in other words, it is a motion to refer back, and it has more specificity, which we can do. But the important difference is a motion to refer back versus just a plain motion to amend is if we vote this motion, then this article is dispensed with for this town meeting. Did that help clarify, Ms. Agostino?
Yes, that was the point I wanted to clarify so that we could move on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, folks, I do not see anyone else wishing to speak. So in front of you is this motion to refer back. If it will require a simple majority. If it passes, that dispenses of this article for this town meeting. If Mr. Asher, yes, we will come to Mr. Asher. I see you wishing to recognize that, and we will certainly go to hear, as we always do before we bring a new motion to the body, the position of the warrant committee. But I just want to remind members that, and Mr. Asher will be the only one recognized, as I think we've got this pretty fully debated. Mr. Asher, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Precinct 6 Town Meeting Member. The Warrant Committee is not in favor of referring this and does not support the motion.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Walker, I see your hands recognized. I will recognize you, but you will be the last speaker, and we're going to move to a vote. This is going close to 2 hours now, which I think has given the town meeting a fair amount of time to debate that. Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, town meeting member, precinct 10. Can you just clarify if an article is referred back by town meeting to a particular body or committee? Is there some restriction about when it can come again before town meeting?
And so, thank you. As I viewed it, and we just recently had a discussion with your former moderator and town council, it really does not necessarily define when it comes back. It's referring it back for that study, and it may come back to the future town meeting.
Thank you.
Is that, and I have town council here, so that reasonable? Some types of articles have restriction. Yeah, so Mr. Walker, he specified, some motions to refer back might have that restrictions in it. This one didn't, and I don't think we can entertain it now.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that we have Arthur Doyle, the chair of our select board, wish to be recognized. And in fact, this was a recommendation of the select board, so I think it's appropriate that we hear your position. Mr. Arthur, you're recognized. Mr. Doyle, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, select board, precinct 7 member. The select board does not support the motion to refer back. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
All right, thank you, Mr. Doyle. And maybe for a little bit more clarity, to Mr. Walker, there are some motions to refer back. If they explicitly reply to a bylaw, for example, then that would have to wait 2 years before it comes back. This one will not have those restrictions. I see a suggestion here to remind people what they are voting on and what yes or no means, and absolutely. So you've heard that the select board does not support this motion to refer back. You've heard the warrant committee does not. And again, I will read it, and it just requires, I'm going to read the motion, and it just requires a majority vote. After I read it, we're going to move to a vote. We have a motion to refer this article go back to the electronic voting committee to ascertain the total cost implementing this, including overtime and other reasonable, foreseen, indirect, and recurring costs. So we're looking for a yes vote if you support that motion, or a no vote if you support the position of the select board in the warrant committee. And I think that provides the clarity you need. I'd ask that we put the poll up. And can we open the phone lines? All those on the phone that are supportive of this motion, please signify by saying yes. All those on the phone that oppose this motion, please signify by saying no.
No.
Thank you. Are we, okay. Votes are still coming in. Okay, so the poll is completed. There are 54 yes votes, or 27%. There are 146 no votes, or 73%, and no abstentions. So the motion to refer back is defeated. So now that the motion to refer back is defeated, we're back to the main motion, which we have been talking about for almost 2 hours. Let's close that poll, please. And I would ask all the town meeting members to consider their time and the other town meeting members' times when I ask the question, does anyone else wish to speak to this motion? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to the main motion, which I will read because it was slightly changed from what was put in your warrant. It is recommended that the town vote to appropriate $30,000 from funds certified by the Department of Revenue as free cash for the purchase or lease of electronic hardware or software voting equipment for use at town meeting. This will require a majority vote. Please put the poll up. And can we open the phones? All those on the phone in favor of this motion, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All those on the phones who are opposed to this motion, please signify by saying no.
No.
Thank you. The votes are still being tallied. Okay, and the results are in. So those in favor, the yes votes, 148 or 71%. No votes was 60 votes or 29% with 0 abstentions. So we close that poll. The motion has passed and we are now on to Article 14. Now, Article 14, I'm going to read what was in the warrant, but it's I know there are some green sheets and other comments relative to this, but let's begin. It's a brief article. It's to see if the town will vote to amend Chapter 2, Section 5 of the general bylaws of the town of Milton for use at future town meetings by replacing Section 5 in its entirety with the following. Section 5, upon a question being put to the town meeting, the moderator will determine by electronic vote the sense of the meeting and shall announce the vote as displayed by the electronic voting system. No town meeting member shall be allowed to vote after the vote is declared and to act on anything related thereto. And it is submitted by the select board, and it was recommended that the town vote to amend Chapter 2, Section 5 of the general bylaws of the town of Milton by replacing Section 5 in its entirety with the following. Section 5, upon a question being put to town meeting, the moderator will determine by electronic vote the sense of the meeting and shall announce the vote as displayed by the electronic voting system. No town meeting member shall be allowed to vote after the vote is declared. Now, as I've mentioned, there were a few town meeting members that submitted suggested changes, and we have a change to it. I'd recommend the chair of our Board of Selectmen first, Mr. Doyle. I understand we have a revised recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. Recommended that the town vote to amend Chapter 2, Section 5 of the general bylaws of the town of Milton for use at future town meetings by adding the following text at the end of Section 5. When an electronic voting system approved by the moderator is in use, upon a question being put to the town meeting, the moderator will determine by electronic vote the sense of the meeting and shall announce the vote as displayed by the electronic voting system. No town meeting member shall be allowed to vote after the vote is declared. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
And I don't know if it's Mr. Doyle or perhaps Mr. Hiss that could add some clarifications. My understanding that the change here is to not to completely eliminate non-electronic voting if the moderator in a future town meeting were to want to continue to use that for some reason. The technology fails, there's a blip. I think I'll turn it to Mr. Hiss. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. A number of members raised the legitimate question, what if we have a power outage or the technology fails or batteries die and it becomes unusable? Shouldn't we have a backup? And the thought that they recommended is to keep the current 2 paragraphs we have in Section 5 that say call for a voice vote if it's challenged, the standing vote if it's challenged, the roll call, and use that in case there's some problem with electronic voting. So I discussed that with town council and with Chair Doyle, and they thought that was prudent recommendations from the members. And so Chair Doyle and town council worked up this language to anticipate some future problem in some future town meeting. So we have the backup, the current plan, the current approach is the backup in the future, to summarize it.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Mr. Doyle, would you prefer to add any clarification on that?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I believe Mr. Hiss has explained it thoroughly.
Thank you. So that is the motion now before the body. Does anyone wish to speak to that motion? Okay, seeing none, I would like to hear from the Warrant Committee, the position of the Warrant Committee.
Mr. Moderator, George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. The Warrant Committee supports the change.
Thank you, Mr. Asher. And thank you for your patience with your moderator not calling you by name. Appreciate that. It's been a long night for me, sir. I'm rusty.
Brian, you're doing a great job. Keep at it. But at this point, if we don't, well, anyway, I'm just worried about taking votes while passing out Halloween candy at this point.
Okay. Seeing no one else wishing to speak and address this article, I remind the body that this will require a majority vote. I'd ask that the poll be put up and can we open the phones? So those on the phones, all those in support of the motion, please signify by saying yes. All those opposed, please signify by saying no.
No.
Thank you. Votes are still coming in. Okay. So the votes are in. 173 or 87% of those that voted yes. 23 or 12% of those that voted no. And there are 3 abstentions. So the motion carries, and we have concluded that. And for your benefit, we've also concluded your opportunity to have to sit there and listen to me. I gratefully and happily turn the podium back over to our elected town moderator, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Brian, for your service here. Ladies and gentlemen, the next article we would normally get to would I think be 22 or so. However, I've received a request from the citizen sponsor of number 47. It looks we're obviously going to roll into Monday. He has asked if we could accelerate Article 47 to right now so that he's able to attend in case we get to 47 on Monday, and as the primary sponsor, he is unable to speak. So I'll entertain a motion to advance Article 47 to the present time. I see Ms. Agostino says so moved. Is there a second? Is there a second to advance the Article 47 to the current time? I see Ms. Mabel Skillen seconds. Thank you. Is there any discussion on advancing Article 47 to the current time? I see Mr. Richard Shea's hand is raised. Sir, you're recognized.
That was a second.
Oh, that was a second. Okay. Then I see no other hands being raised. This is just require a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And if we could open the poll. Poll is open on the phone. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute the phone. And we put up the result. The motion carries with a vote of 131 yeses at 66%, 61 noes at 31%, and 4 abstains at 2%. With that, on Article 47, we're going to hear from a few people tonight. The first is Mr. Rasher, the chair of the Warrant Committee, to explain the Warrant Committee's recommendation. Then I'd like to hear from Kevin Freitag, Town Council, and then we would recognize as the lead speaker on the article, Mr. Jerry Burke. So with that, Mr. Rasher, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, the town meeting, the Warrant Committee met and at the advice of Town Council looked at the merit of the article itself rather than the intent. The article requires the town meeting to instruct the select board to act on an issue that is not their purview. We have been advised not their purview, as the select board has control of this piece of land as it is, and the town, we were advised by Town Council that it was not in the purview of the town meeting to make this obligation on the select board. So that was the rationale that prevailed at the Warrant Committee, and hence our recommendation to vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Rasher. Mr. Freitag, could you just explain the legalese to the members tonight, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council.
You're breaking up, Kevin.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator. Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Moderator. Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council. The rule of law that the
town meeting should be aware of right now is that a legislative body cannot compel the executive when the executive is acting within its exclusive power. Pursuant to Mass General Law, land given to the town is under the exclusive control of the select board unless otherwise noted in the manner in which it's given to the town. This particular piece of property right now is controlled by the select board, and so the legislative body cannot direct or compel the select board to do something with it, because ultimately that is up to the select board. It's subject to perhaps other restrictions on the property and other state or federal laws. It's up to the select board to decide how to use that property in accordance with state and federal law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freitag. With that, if we could make sure Mr. Burke is a panelist so he can speak. Mr. Burke, by prior agreement, submitted some slides to the town moderator. We have those slides available here. Mr. Burke, are you there?
I am.
Thank you. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you very much. Just a quick comment to the chair of the Warrant Committee. It's great that we have the opportunity to speak to the merits. But as a practical matter, if this has no technical meaning to it, and we cannot tell the select board what to do, I respectfully ask that you consider this as a non-binding referendum. What that will do is show the residents and other individuals that they have their support to treat this land like Article 97 land, and to have the hearings that they have not had to date. I'll move forward on my prepared remarks, 4 to 5 minutes. I thank you all very much for the attention in this matter concerning Algerine Corner. I took a great leap of faith when I emailed all that material. I know that you all studied it hard. My contact information is there on the Facebook page, which referenced in the email. Please call me to discuss anytime. 2 points I'm making at the beginning. Neighboring children will lose a natural, shady play area used for over 75 years. The presence of polluted water with human waste and human E. coli presents a potential health matter to children. I have sent via email the info about the history of the generous donation of the land to the town by Mrs. Houghton, one of many parcels she donated. I have shown clearly her intent that the parcel be kept in its present state and for use of the neighboring children, notwithstanding the absence of restrictive covenants. For many of you, I hope that alone is persuasive enough.
Mr. Burke, could you just remind us when you want us to advance slides along with your speech? Okay, thank you.
On 2 other occasions, one approximately 75 years ago, and again in 1963 or 64, the town chose to honor the wishes of Mrs. Houghton and kept Algerine Corner open and for the children. I'll move on to a brief discussion about the DPW plan. Slide 1, please. There is at least one alternate site mentioned in the 2016 report. Smaller, but in conjunction with other methods, which I'll point out, may yield the same corrective measures as the retention area at Algerine Corner. Slide 2, please. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are the disadvantages, but I do want to highlight. It will create a public health concern with the exposed pollutant surface water containing human waste and possibly pharmaceuticals, which are increasingly being found in wastewater. It will not be able to be used by children after the construction of it. Retention areas are subject to high failure rate. Failures are difficult to predict and not noticeable before failure. Some of the effects of failure include clogging of the permeable base material that the water is supposed to flow through and sift out pollutants, foul odors, and clogging of inlet and outflow pipes. The 2016 equity report identified a dry weather flow. In layman's terms, almost a constant flow of liquid, even when it's not raining. With a constant flow, the system will not be able to drain out within the planned recharge rate of 70 or so hours, contributing to problems, heightening the threat to those large trees and flooding. This dry weather flow has an increased concentration of human E. coli. It will not prevent water from entering Unquity Brook during high rain amounts and during the winter when the surface will be frozen. That is the untreated water. It will not work during those periods. Slide 3, please. There are other methods more reliable and when used in high numbers are effective. 50 of these will be less than the project at Algerine Corner being proposed. They are being used in the town of Arlington at a cost of approximately $5,000 per catch basin and may be installed by our DPW crews if more economical. $5 million in grants were awarded to Arlington and the Mystic River watershed area for this method. As they call it, small but mighty when used in numbers. I was advised by seasoned town meeting members to be brief, but please, don't take my brevity for passive support. This is an extremely important issue. The process is extremely important. We need the transparency in discussing this meeting. We need the protections of Article 97. We need a vote by the select board. There's been no vote to change the intent of Mrs. Houghton or to approve this type of project. Yet DPW has moved ahead over the past year, securing grant money and acting as if there will be no vote. Please, vote yes, notwithstanding the non-binding recommendation of the warrant committee. Give DPW an opportunity to go back to the drawing board for alternative locations and methods. I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burke, both for your efforts as a citizen and rehearsing and staying within our requested time limit. I appreciate it. With that, does anyone wish to speak to this article and recommendation? I see one hand, Mr. Fahey, Mr. Coyle. Mr. Fahey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9. A couple of comments I'd like to make on this. As some may know, I'm born and raised in Milton. I've been here my whole life, and I grew up on Pleasant Street. And I've always found that particular end of Pleasant Street to probably be the most appealing and scenic, significantly because of the Algerine Corner area. And I find it to be an area that's pleasant to be in, no pun intended, but it's an area where you can gather and it's really quite relaxing. The trees that are down that end of the street are not consistent throughout Pleasant Street. And so I although I don't necessarily favor how restrictive Article 47 is, I would like to, and I hope that we would do everything in our ability to find an alternative means of accomplishing what we need to accomplish before we would use an area such as Algerine Corner. As the time's gone on as the years have gone on over time, more and more of the town has become developed. Open areas have continued to disappear, and the character of the town continues to change as a result of that. So I would hope that consideration, maybe not necessarily for what's written in Article 7, to authorize the select board to prohibit any change to Ellis Green Corner, but rather to request the select board revisit this process and this decision so that we provide an extreme amount of consideration for maintaining Ellis Green Corner.
Thank you, sir. I see two other hands. Mr. Coyle, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'll be brief. I just have what I would like to see is whatever construction funds are committed to do this project. I understand the DPW has been doing some studies. I visited the site a couple of times recently, and I'd like it to change the nature of the article so that the funds are controlled by authorized by town meeting. I understand the select board has jurisdiction over it, but I believe it still needs any funding or even use of funding, wherever the source is from, should be approved by town meeting. So I think that would clear up the objections of the warrant committee that we understand that it is the control, I guess, of the property, even if it's town-owned property, but it's controlled by the select board, the disposition of it. And I support what Mr. Burke has said, as well as Mr. Fahey, that, but the process, I think the people that live in that area felt that from what I've heard, that the process by the PPW was rushed. They were not given adequate notice, in their opinion, as to attend the presentations that were given about this project. And that was a concern. So I think by having a more formal process to approve whatever the DPW ends up doing here, had proper hearings. So and I'd like to see it go back to be referred to, if that's possible, to the select board for further instructions on how to go about handling the concerns of the local citizens.
Not quite sure what to do with your statement. I could take that. Did you have a question on how any future project would occur?
Yes, future projects I think would need, just like the Jal Road project, the field that was discussed on an earlier article there, that needed town meeting approval. I don't see why this one should be any different.
I see. So your question is, if some project happens in the future, will town meeting have an opportunity to discuss and vote on it, on the expenditure of it?
And by doing that, that gives the residents of the area better opportunities to comment on it.
Understood. I may ask Mr. Doyle of the Select Board, perhaps Mr. Berkeley, what such a process would be like.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Precinct 7, Town Meeting. At this time, I would like to request that Mr. Chase Berkeley, Director of the Department of Public Works, be recognized.
Yes, Mr. Berkeley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chase Berkeley, Director of Public Works. So this project right now has been awarded a grant from the EPA and Mass DEP in the amount of $160,000 for construction. However, following the legal review that is ongoing, we have paused all work on the project to move it to a construction phase. So the merits of the Article 97 evaluation and the true owner of the land, were in question for quite some time on this project. So we asked town council, and who in turn we worked with the state's Office of Environment and Energy to determine what applicable land use is available to the town here for this project. So it's basically in a pause mode until we get that answer, which we don't have at this time. Mr. Freitag might be able to elaborate a little more eloquently on that.
Before I go to him, though, let's say it would proceed. What role would town meeting have in the approval expenditure of funds for such a project?
Yeah, so we do not have an appropriated construction funding for this project yet. So there would be, if this project had not been paused, there would likely have been an article in this town meeting to approve construction funding for this project.
So the answer to Mr. Coyle's question is, if it goes forward, it would need an article in a future town meeting, and town meeting would be voting on the appropriation for the project.
Yes.
I think that, Mr. Coyle, did that answer your question?
Oh, it certainly does. And I think it'll make the residents of the local area feel a lot better about it.
Okay, very good. I don't think there's any further legal problems. I think you had a money question as I understood it. So I think if you're satisfied, we're good.
Yes.
Mr. Burke, I see your hand is up, and Ms. Agostino had her hand raised first. Ma'am, Ms. Agostino, you're recognized. Yes, ma'am, we can see you.
Sorry about that. Diane DiTullio, Agostino, Precinct 9. I'd like to thank these citizens for bringing this to our attention. We drive through town, we see land, it looks beautiful, green and everything else, but they really presented the health concerns, and any governing board managing land has to be concerned about the land and any negative health impacts, which would clearly be a concern for the neighbors, especially the children in the area. So has the proponent pointed out that, well, we as town meeting members taking this vote may not have the authority to instruct the select board per some Mass General law that I don't believe was clearly identified. It would be a referendum that we do have a concern that there are other locations, and now hearing from the director of the DPW that there may be legal issues gives the impetus to vote yes, support these residents, keep the land healthy for the neighborhood, because it's a very, condensed area. And whether or not it is mandated under the law, at least it sends a message that we are supportive of all the work they've done to educate all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I see, by the way, Mr. Burt, I know your hand is up, but before recognizing you, our policy is we asked everyone who gets a chance to speak once before someone gets a chance to speak twice. So I'll come back to you, I promise. It's either Mr. or Ms. Tagayas, not sure which one you recognized.
It is Ms. Tagayas. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you.
Cheryl Tagayas, Precinct 9. Could Mr. Chase provide a brief overview of the project, what its purpose is? My understanding is that it is meant to clean up Unquity Brook and the Neponset River. So if he could give us a brief comment on that, please. Thank you.
Mr. Doyle, if okay with you, I'll recognize Mr. Berkeley.
Absolutely, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So Chase Berkeley again. Yes, so the town has been working with the Neponset River watershed for a number of years to improve the water quality of the Unquity Brook. And part of that effort was to identify locations where we could build what they call best management practices, or BMPs, to divert stormwater from the pipes that are underground into plant life to take advantage of the natural cleansing. So this parcel was selected because of its location and its proximity to Unquity Brook. The brook actually runs through the land in a masonry channel. And then it's just upstream of Gulliver's Creek, which is down off of Squantum Street, where there is a sensitive ecological area. And so essentially what the project does is divert water out of the pipe that's underground and construct a rain garden. And the water is flowed through the rain garden and then back into Unquity Brook. And so there would be changes in the landscape of the parcel in the form of new plantings, some grading and shaping, some stormwater structures to outlet water and things of that nature. There's a dedicated website that's on the town website. If you go to townofmilton.org and search Algerine Corner, all of the drawings, pictures, and backup information is there if any of the residents would like to view it. But I think that's a very quick overview of how we got to this point.
Mr. Moderator, may I ask a follow-up question?
Please.
Mr. Berkeley, there was a comment made by a previous speaker that human waste could potentially be here. My understanding that you're speaking about stormwater, not sanitary systems. Is that correct?
So correct. We're talking about stormwater, but we're talking about urban stormwater. And urban stormwater collects different forms of pollution, typically oils from the streets, phosphorus and other nutrients from fertilizers that wash off lawns. And in some cases, there is sewage that leaks from pipes underground, or animal contamination for animal waste gets into that stormwater stream. So bacteria is certainly present in urban stormwater.
That sounded like this answered Mr. Guy's question. Okay, I see no further hands. Yes, Mr. Burke, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Couple of quick points. With all due respect to Chase Berkeley, Mr. Berkeley, the 2016 Neponset River Watershed Association report, which is on your website, on page 6, in the area of where the pipes are going to be cut going into Algerine Corner, contain human E. coli markers. And I was told by a public health professional, call it human waste. It is caused by possibly illegal hookups, and there is sewage going down there. I failed to mention the dry weather flow, which is in fact, if it were just storm water, when it's not raining, there'd be no water. However, there is a dry weather flow. So when it's not raining, there is liquid going in there. The report says that on dry weather flows, there's a higher concentration of human E. coli. If I may ask a question of the town council.
Yes, sir.
I know that you received a verbal answer that the use is an inconsistent use. This bolsters the Article 97. Has there been any discussion that this is not Article 97, notwithstanding the answer you received from the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs?
So the question is are you asking, is this official Article 97 land, or have they just received no comment either way on whether it's 97 land?
No, they did receive a verbal report that was reported in a select board that, and town council knows the difference. Article 97 land may be used for consistent purposes. The ruling by the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs is that this retention is an inconsistent use and therefore inappropriate under Article 97.
Okay, so you'd like to hear from town council on this. All right. Very good. Mr. Freitag, could you answer the member's question? I'm sorry, the citizen's question.
Yes, good evening. Kevin Freitag again from the Office of Town Council. The select board asked Mr. Berkeley and I to ask the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs to give us an opinion as to whether or not the project that Mr. Berkeley just described would be permissible on this property if we assume that the property is protected by Article 97. And the response back that we got from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which was verbal, and we're waiting for a written opinion or comment to this effect, is that if we assume that the property is protected by Article 97, then the project that has been described by Mr. Berkeley would be an inconsistent use, and that the town would need to seek relief through the Article 97 process, which requires special legislation and a vote of the legislature to approve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see, Mr. Burke, I see your hand, but Mr. Fahey had his hand up next. His second shot, and then Mr. Fahey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9. One question for Mr. Berkeley, if I could, Mr. Moderator, direct one to Mr. Berkeley, and also potentially a question for the citizen who has written the citizen's petition. My question for Mr. Berkeley is, could he give a brief description of an alternative location where we may accomplish the same objective? And is there a cost difference that was part of a driver to select Algerine Corner? So that question would be for Mr. Berkeley. Mm-hmm. And a second question for the citizen who wrote the citizen's petition. Given some of the conversation that's gone on tonight, would he consider amending, his article and potentially change the language to request that the select board revisit, this process rather than have language that prohibits any change? I don't know if I've made it complicated, Mr. Moderator, by asking two questions of such nature, but if you would please allow me to. Thank you.
Let's start with Mr. Berkeley and then address the second one. Mr. Berkeley, if okay with the select board, if you could answer alternate location questions or difference in cost, if so.
Yes, Mr. Moderator. So Chase Berkeley again. So there is an alternate site that's also currently under design, which is in the rear of the Cunningham Collycott School. That project also has a website dedicated to it on the town's website, if any residents would like to take a look at that. The tributary area to both Algerine Corner and the Cunningham Collycott is about 60 acres. So it's an equivalent site that we have under design now through another grant that we received from the state to implement these best management practices.
Mr. Moderator, could I ask Mr. Berkeley, is that the wooded area that's behind that wooded area, Mr. Berkeley, I believe kind of merges, behind Cunningham and Collycott. Is that the area that you were speaking of?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
It does. I just a general comment. That area I don't think is any form of a play area like Algerine Corner is. If Mr. Berkeley, would you agree?
Behind Cunningham Collycott is a fully wooded area. There is a walking path that takes you down to Pleasant Street that meanders through there, but it is a wooded area. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fahey. Your second question was, would Mr. Burke be willing to ask the select board, perhaps amend this? Well, first off, Mr. Burke can't propose an amendment because we need a town meeting member to do so. But are you recommending an amendment to this? To instead of, I won't put words in your mouth. We need a town meeting member to amend this article. A town meeting member to amend this article.
Mr. Moderator, could I ask a question of the citizen that wrote this petition? Would he be interested in receiving an amendment to this, or does he prefer that it not be amended and go to town meeting for a vote?
Okay, Mr. Burke, I see your hand is raised. You're recognized.
Thank you, Jerry Burke. Thank you for your question. I do want to answer quickly. At the opening of my remarks, I pointed out an alternative site that was mentioned in the report that is not under consideration right now at the other end of the section of Center Street between Brook and Pleasant Street. That is the Brook Road and the Center Street, the three other corners, excluding Fontbonne Academy. It's smaller, but that, along with not only alternative locations, but an alternative system, that diversion system attached to each of the culverts, wasn't around in 2016, I don't believe. It's a relatively new process. It keeps the water, polluted water, below ground. It takes away that first flush as they call it. And between those alternative methods and the site that I just mentioned, you could possibly, I don't know, I'm not an engineer and I haven't been able to get that, but you could get pretty darn close to the same results. Now, with respect to an amendment, as the moderator said, I am not allowed. The whole problem with the warrant committee was that you can't tell the select board what to do. I respectfully again suggest that a yes vote, notwithstanding the warrant committee's recommendation, would send that message to the select board. I want to add, I believe strongly that this is Article 97. For 19 years, I wrote laws for the Massachusetts Senate as assistant counsel to the Senate. I brought this to the attention of everyone in January of 2021. It wasn't until December when it seemed to have gotten some legs. The fact that Article 97 is not being listened to or accepted, because I feel that there's a couching in the comments, baffles me. So I am going to take a leap of faith. I believe we'll be all contacting the select board soon to get that vote to follow Article 97. If they don't, and it turns out that it is in fact Article 97, they'll have no grant money. That's the penalty that the state imposes. I thank you for your question. And as I said, I don't believe further study will help, only because it's all advisory. It will help if we have a majority of the town meeting members voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gaius, I see you're the last hand up. We'll go to you and then go to a vote.
Question, I believe, for town council, Mr. Moderator, Cheryl Tagayas, Precinct 9. If there were a motion to amend, would all of the signatories to this citizens petition have to agree to that amendment? Thank you.
Yes, I actually discussed with town council in advance, and if he wants to be recognized, he can. But once the citizens follow the process to put an article into the select board, and the select board validates the process, that article becomes an article that stands on its own, regardless of who the signatories were, whether it's the planning board or all the members. For example, we check with the planning board on one of their articles. That's a courtesy, not a requirement. So at this point, any town meeting member can make a proper motion to amend this article without checking in with any of the citizens. But I think Mr. Fahey was just looking for a sense of Mr. Burke, just as we would look for a sense from the planning board. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
And then I see Ms. Agostino. Yes, ma'am. Hands down, Ms. Agostino. Would you wish to speak?
Once again, I double pushed the mute button to make sure I didn't speak up out of line. Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9.
I know the technologies, it's baffling sometimes, ma'am.
Well, you know, my father used to say the best thing about me being a selectman was he could mute the TV. Remember, laughter is the best medicine.
God bless him.
So thank you. Former attorney Gerard Burke gave me the time about a little over a month ago to discuss this particular article, and that's why I am supporting a yes vote. However, in listening to the discussion, if there is a reasonable motion, I'm just not sure of the language that I think it was Sean Fahey suggested. So if you could expedite getting that language, I would be willing to make that motion, and it sounds like there would be a second to it as well.
Well, Mr. Fahey, I think, was checking in with Mr. Burke, and he said, if I understood his words, I'd rather leave it as is and take a leap of faith that town meeting will approve it as is. So unless, I don't want to get into the business, I guess, of writing members' amendments here. If you have a thought.
That's the difficulty with these Zoom meetings. I wasn't 100% sure that's what I had heard from the proponent of the article. And he was right that the warrant committee obviously took the fact that there is some mass general law prohibiting that we do it. But if we do vote yes, it certainly does send the message that we're putting public health first, public safety first. I do know many residents in that area that have had sewage back up into their homes. It's not the nicest of things to happen. And I grew up right next to the area that's being discussed across the street from Fontbonne Academy. And that is nowhere where anybody goes to play because of the trees that are there. So if the proponent did not want the amendment, then I'm fine with that. But I couldn't quite exactly get the words to give you, Mr. Moderator, should he wish the article to be amended.
Okay. At this point, I think we've heard from everyone. I'd like to go to a vote. It's now almost 10:45. So let me just describe how we vote when there's a no recommendation. It's a little different. So one of our rules says when the warrant committee recommends no, change the way you think about voting. You're not voting on the recommendation anymore. You're now voting on the article. So if you are in favor of the article, the non-bold text, you vote yes. I want that article to pass. The warrant committee is recommending a no vote. If you don't like the article, you vote no. You're doing what the warrant committee recommended. So if you like the article as written, you vote yes. If you don't like the article, you vote no. It's that simple. And this is a majority vote. So with that, if we could put up the poll. I'm sorry, Mr. Doyle. I see your hand recognized. I see your hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The select board recommends a no vote.
Okay, thank you. With that, if we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And if we could open the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute. Zoom admin, let me know when we're ready. Sure. Okay, can put up the poll. The motion fails with a vote of 76 yeses at 41%, 107 noes at 57%, and 3 abstentions at 2%. Thank you all. Given that it is 10:45, entertain a motion to adjourn. I see such a motion from Mr. Matthews. Is there a second? A second from Ms. Agostino. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Curran, you wish to discuss a motion to adjourn. Mr. Curran, you're recognized.
I was just seconding that. That's all.
Just seconding. Sorry, just so you know, if you could type the word second into the chat, that way it's real clear whether you're so moved or second. Very good. Oh. Seeing no hands, we could put up the poll on the motion to adjourn.
I didn't know that.
All those in favor, please, excuse me. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. We could open up the phones. Phones are open on the phones. In favor of adjourn, please say aye.
Aye. Yes.
Aye. Opposed, no. And as soon as you can, Mr. Zoom, I'm sure we'll be done. And the motion carries 163 yeses at 94%, 10 noes at 6%, and 0 abstentions at 0%. Ladies and gentlemen, Monday the 13th at 7:30, we'll reconvene. Thank you for your patience and for your efforts. Have a nice weekend.